Welcome everyone to the virtual conference with Speed Queen, and Timothy Petz is here. He joins us today, and also Jenny McClatchy, excuse me, is here to go ahead and talk to you about Speed Queen and just some of the emerging issues that they have. And I will, well, before I do that, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment or the chat box, and I will monitor that during the presentation. And I will let Tim know, and then we'll go ahead and answer any of your questions. So, Tim, take it away.
All right, I'm Tim with Alliance Laundry Systems here in Ripon, Wisconsin. I'm the lead technical service representative for Alliance Laundry Systems. I'm going to start out today by doing the My Alliance, site to get you into a major tool we have. It's called Parts Connection. So right here, the screen that we have up right now is going to be the My Alliance site. So we can just go into the search box and we can type Parts Connection. It's going to look different for everybody. A little bit different, depends on, this is how I have mine set up. So we're going to go here, let it all come up. And if I get down to the bottom here, we're going to have Parts Connection, Home Models. So I'm going to click on that. And here we go. And this is what Parts Connection looks like, the home page. Again, I'm going to get out of this click. And when I get into Parts Connection and I want to look something up for a machine, usually we ask you to put the entire serial number. So under other number, it says entire serial number. So I'm going to enter a serial number. And then we'll click on the search. And you're going to see under assembly drawings one result, it's going to come up with one model number. So we're going to left click on that model number. And our left column here is going to be our part breakdown for this machine. So you can click on each one. Here we have the upper console, your control board, graphic panel, your graphic support, and everything on that. Again, I will go to, the motor page. I mean, again, it's going to bring up everything that's going to be on there. So if you find the part you're looking for, I'm going to go under the motor. So it says motor hub ring kit. Just because it has this part number here doesn't always say it's going to be the correct part number. I always left click on the part number, and it's going to put that part number in the pick list. So if it supersedes to a different part number, that number will come up here in the pick list. So this one comes up as the same number. So never use a part number until you put it here in this pick list. Once it makes the pick list, it's a good part number. So we'll go back. And so again, this is all your parts of the machine. Keep going through it until you find the part that you're looking for. It has everything, all our parts and everything. So it's very simple to use. Again, when you choose a part, click on the part here and make sure it gets into the pick list before you order a part, to make sure you have the correct part number and make sure that that part doesn't supersede to another part number. So I'm going to go back again. And then in our right column here, we have the second one down. It's called related literature. We'll left click on that. Here you're going to have your warranty bond, your installation manual, another parts manual, a use and care manual, a troubleshooting manual, 2 different languages, and general product information. That there's not much in there. So I'm going to go to our troubleshooting manual. And this is where you're going to find the error codes for our machines. And that's what I'm going to be covering today, is how to diagnose error codes. I got some of the top error codes. Again, here we have 2 different, choices for error codes. Again, it's by serial number. So all the machines that are 19129999 and older, it would be that error code listing, all the machines 2001000001. You're going to use this, click on this one, and you'll get the error codes for the 2020 machines, January 2020 machines and newer. So again, you can click on one of the error codes. Here are our error codes. This is how we have them listed in our troubleshooting guide. It's going to give you a basic, of what the error code is, in a little bit of a cause and corrective action. But what I'm going to cover today is going to be a little bit more detailed into how to diagnose a specific error code. So I am going to get back out of this. And again, if the customer is using care manual, you can go to here and you can get a using care manual. You can go to speedqueen.com and go in there and also get manuals, for the customer. You can go to speedqueendoc.net and they are printable there off of that website. All the using care and the installation manual. The troubleshooting manual is not in there. That's going to only be in the parts connection here. So it's a very major tool for servicers to use, and this is how you get it. So get your username, password, get into the My Alliance website, get into parts connection, look up your parts, get them in the pick list to make sure it's a correct part. If you need troubleshooting, if you need error codes, I got this error code, you can go to the troubleshooting and open that up and get your error codes. And we do also have some flow charts after the error codes. You can use that also. I'll just bring up a flow chart here real quick. After the error codes. Yeah, this one doesn't have it. It has it before the error codes. So yeah, so we have some flow charts. Here's one of the flow charts. Excessive chattering or vibrating noise. It tells you what to look for. If a yes, go to here. If no, go down here. You can use those flow charts to help you diagnose these machines. So I am going to get out of here. And I'm going to get into the PowerPoint that I have for today's meeting. Okay, it's not letting me share.
I'm seeing it, Tim.
Okay, you can see it?
Yeah.
All right. All right, here's the presentation I put together today for residential SpeedQueen error codes. Again, safety concerns, make sure you follow safety. If you're taking the machine apart, make sure we're unplugging the machine. We want our servicers to be safe. We don't want to electrocute anybody. We don't want any cuts. I mean, these parts in these machines are stamped parts. So they have very sharp edges. So just wear the clothing and everything to protect yourself, and just be safe. Okay, this is the error codes, the 7 error codes that we see. This is a full panel hybrid dryer, which would be the ADE6 dryer, steam dryer. And this is the one that does not have the display, the digital display. And we're going to start out on top here. Extended thumb 4 times is the error code. That's a board ID error code. So it has the wrong board that has been put into the machine. So if you get this error code, either you put a board in and the board didn't match. Again, it didn't match up with the serial number or anything that, that was, is again, it's really important to make sure when you get a part number out of parts connection, click on it and make sure it goes in the pick list so we're ordering the right part. Again, wrong board has been put into the machine. And then we got our next one is going to be extended thumb 2 times. These are going to be lights flashing on the display, and that's a broken belt error code. At this point in time, we're going to check if the belt is broken. And in this machine, we have a broken belt switch by the motor. So if the belt breaks, the idler arm, falls and hits the broken belt switch is going to stop the machine. If the belt is broken, replace the belt. If the belt is not broken, ohm out the broken belt switch. If the broken belt switch, ohms out bad, replace that broken belt switch. It's the only thing that can cause this broken belt error code. I know on some of our earlier machines, when we first introduced the broken belt switch, we had, it was in parallel with the door switch. So if the door switch would go bad, it could also give the broken belt error code. But on this specific machine, the broken belt switch reports directly to the output board. So on this one, it would be just ohming out the broken belt switch. If it's on the one parallel, you would need to check the broken belt switch and the door switch. All right, the next one we got extended TUM continuous, where it's just a continuous flash. There's no breaks between, the flashing. That would be a communication error. The first thing I do when I have a technician call in and they got that error code, we're going to go down to that lower board. We're going to go to the H2 connector on that output board and then check your DC voltage. Your DC voltage on that H2 connector, it's an 8-pin connector, and the red to white is going to be, should be at least 12 volts DC. And gray to white needs to be between 5.5 and 7.5 volts DC. That is very important. If it's out of that range of 5.5 to 7.5, that upper board isn't getting the proper DC voltage on the poor fail circuit in that machine, and that upper board can do really weird things. You can see lights flashing, it won't start at all, and stuff like that. Obviously here a communication error, because we need that 5.5 to 7.5 on that power failed system in order for the upper board to come on and communicate properly with the lower board. If voltages are not within the parameters and you have 120 volts at the H1 connector on that output board, black to white and black to green, then replace the output board. If voltage is checked good at the output board, then check the X1 connector. It's the same 8-pin connector on the upper board, same wires, same everything. And again, we're going to be checking that red to white. And again, at least 12 volts DC. And gray to white needs to be between, again, the 5.5 and 7.5 DC. And if we have the voltages at the lower board and don't have it at the upper board, you have a bad harness, replace that harness. If we have it at the upper board, that DC voltage, that means that everything within this system so far that we've checked is working properly. So at that point in time, if we have that communication error, you're going to check the connectors, take the connectors at the output board and the upper front end control, and we're going to look for corrosion, loose wires, loose pins, anything like that. Pull on the wires just to make sure that they're in those connectors properly, and that the connectors are seated all the way on the boards. And if we find, like we have corrosion on the connector on the harness, replace the harness. If we have corrosion on one of the pins or a pin on the board that's bad, is loose, then replace that board. If everything checks good at that point in time, the orange and yellow wire in that harness from that the two connectors are the two wires that they communicate on. So the communication is going back and forth on that yellow and orange wire. And that's a pulsing DC voltage. That is nothing that I don't know that any tech out in the field can read that voltage because of the pulse, and it's such a minute voltage, so we would ohm out the yellow and orange wire. If the yellow and orange wire both ohm out good, we have no further diagnosis for that error code. You'd have to replace both boards and the wire harness. It's very important. Just because you ohm out that yellow and orange wire and it ohms out good, again, we got to remember we're working with DC voltage, and a crack in that wire, that DC voltage cannot jump that crack. Where we ohming, if it's touching enough, that crack in the wire's touching enough, it will ohm through that. So it doesn't mean just because that orange and yellow wire ohms out good, that it's good. because again, that low pulsing DC voltage. Okay, moving on to the next, extended thumb, door open, flashes one time between pauses, centrifugal switch error. At that one, we would check the AC voltage yellow to ground at the H3 connector on that output board. You should have the 120 volts AC. Now, this is the voltage it's going to go on that H3 connector on a brown wire to the motor. And then once the motor centrifugal switch closes, it sends it back to the board, letting the board know that the motor is running. So if we get it back there, then you have a bad board. If you don't have the voltage there, check to make sure your drum rollers, idler pulley, everything turns freely. Your blower wheel, make sure that it's not, that motor's not being bound up, that then centrifugal switch can't close, and give the voltage back to the board. And if everything is turning freely, check that yellow wire at the motor to see if we have any voltage on that yellow wire from yellow to ground. At the connector right on the motor. And if you have no voltage there, you're going to replace that motor. If AC voltage is good there, and then check it at the H3 and you don't have it at the H3 and you do have it at the motor, you have a bad harness. So, and I'll take a break here, in a little while once I'm done with dryer. If anybody has questions on any of this, we can field questions. We'll see how the training is going, and we'll try doing questions for sure at the end, so we're going to move down to number 5, extended thumb, door open. Both lights are flashing 2 times between pauses. Motor output shorted error. This one, it's the motor relay on that output board is shorted. We have no other choice but to replace that output board at that point in time. Again, that's a lower board in the machine down the bottom left of the machine. Again, that access panel in the front of the machine, you can take it off and it's going to be right there in the bottom left. We're going to move down to 6, heating continuous, non-fatal shorted thermistor error. The way I check this one, I go to the output board, to the H4 connector. There's 2 black wires that attach to that H4 connection on that output board. Take the 2 wires off of that connector and then ohm across the 2 wires. And the thermistor should read 50K when you ohm that out at 77 degrees. The warmer the dryer is, the lower the resistance. So let's say we're at about 100 degrees, you're going to be approximately 32, 33, 35 K ohms there then. So I was taking consideration how warm the dryer is, the ambient temperature in a room that you're doing it at. If it's shorted, the thermistor on go to the blower housing. If you read a short there at the 2 wires, then let's go to that front of that blower housing and remove the wires from the thermistor, and we'll ohm right across the thermistor. And if that thermistor is shorted out, then the thermistor needs to be replaced. And if the thermistor is reading good and you're reading the short through the wires, replace that harness. And then moving on to 7, cooling continuous. That's a non-fatal open thermistor error. Again, exact same, not the exact same thing. Here we're looking for an open thermistor. So we're going to go again back to that H4, the 2 black wires, ohm across those 2 black wires. Again, if you're reading open, then we're going to go directly again to the thermistor, take the 2 black wires off the thermistor and ohm across that thermistor. If that thermistor is reading open, replace the thermistor. If the thermistor is not reading open and you're getting the 50K at 77 degrees, then you're going to have an issue with the harness. And if the thermistor and through the harness is reading good, we would replace that output board down there in the lower part of that machine because it's reading the thermistor incorrectly. Same as step 6, the continuous or the shorted thermistor. I guess I didn't cover that. If everything checks good when checking the thermistor, again, the output board would be bad, and that's what reads the thermistor. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. A lot of these error codes are basically the same thing as what I just covered. It's going to look a little bit different because now we have a display. And you're going to get an ER and usually 2 letters behind. Again, the ERSH, which I just covered here in the back last slide, that shorted thermistor again. Again, we're back at that H4 connector to 2 black wires, same process. We're checking to see if that thermistor is shorted. If it is, replace that thermistor. If it's the thermistor reads good and the wires are shorted, replace the harness. If both of them read good, you have that 50K again at 77 degrees, replace the output board. Again, to here, the next one is going to be the ERNS, and that's a motor, output shorted error again. Again, this is the one where the motor relay on that output board is shorted, and that output board needs to be replaced. Again, the broken belt, the ERBB, a lot of times the customers will say ER66, but it's actually 2 lowercase b's for broken belt. Again, checking if the belt is broke. If the belt is broke, obviously replace the belt. If not broken, almost that broken belt switch, by the motor. If it doesn't almost good, replace that broken belt switch. And then we have the ERID. Again, it's a board ID error. Again, these are almost identical error codes as what we had last time, the diagnosing of them. It just shows up a little bit different because, again, we have a display and not flashing lights. Again, the ID is the wrong board's been put into the machine. It has the incorrect part number. The upper and lower board by serial break, because we have a, different serial breaks where we came out with new boards, and the boards have to be compatible. So if you have the lower board, for a certain serial number, it will match the upper board for that serial number also. So if it doesn't match, you'll get the board, the ERID error code. And the ERRO, again, is the locked rotor centrifugal switch error. Again, it's sensing that the motor, the output board is not getting voltage back on the yellow wire at the H3 connector. Again, we trace that out, go, make sure everything turns freely, go to the motor. If you don't have voltage at the H3 on the output board, go to the motor, check it there. If you don't have it there, everything's turning freely. Yeah, you have a bad motor. Just that motor is locked up. If we have it at the yellow wire at the motor and don't have it at the board, again, a broken wire, bad harness. So if you do have the voltage at the H3 connector on the board at that yellow wire, you'll have a bad board. That output board on the lower part of that machine is bad. And again, we have the communication error. Again, we're looking for DC voltages. Again, it's the 2 boards communicating with each other. And they always do it on the H2. Some of them on the upper board is listed either as H2 or X1. It's always the 8-pin connector, with that carries the DC voltage. Again, we're going to start at the lower board. It's the lower board that produces the DC voltage. Again, red to white needs to be at least 12 volts DC, and gray to white needs to be between 5.5 and 7.5. When we diagnose our machines, these is one area that we go to almost all the time, because this is DC voltage is a main player in this machine. If that upper board is not receiving proper voltage, it's going to do weird things. It's not going to start. You're going to have lights flashing. It's going to start beeping. It's going to, it does so many different things. Again, I don't know that I need to go through this whole thing. We just did it before, and again, if anybody has questions, we'll field questions here at the end, or I'm going to possibly do it after this slide if we have time. Again, EROP is the open thermistor. Again, we're going to be going to that H4 connector, down on that lower board, the output board. Again, remove the 2 black wires, ohm out. Is it open? If it is open, go to the thermistor, take the wires off the thermistor. If it's open, replace the thermistor. If it's not open and the thermistor is reading good and we're open through the harness, replace the harness. And if we're not open, we're reading the 50K at approximately 77 degrees, then we're going to go and replace that output board. It responds to that output board. So Carmine, do we have any questions? This is for the dryers. This is the dryers. I'll be moving on to front load washers next. If anybody has any questions on the error codes I just covered, Carmine can let me know what we got. And
Tim, there's just been some questions about registering product, things like that, that Jenny's been answering in the background. So you're fine.
okay, awesome. Alrighty. And if there's any questions on this diagnosis process, please let me know and I can, walk it through and try answering your question also that way. So we're going to move on to the front load washer, diagnosing error codes on the front load washer. Here I have the top 8 error codes that we see. I think a lot of our front load washers have anywhere, 50, 60 error codes. A lot of them we never see. But it's just they are in the programming of the machine. I just put down the top 8. So for the first one, we got ERDL for door lock fatal error. So we're going to check our AC voltage. Now our door locks on this front load washer is going to be AC voltage, and we're going to check that the red wire to the pink wire with the black tracer at H5 on that output drive board. And if we have the voltage there, we would have the board would be bad. If we don't have the voltage there, if we don't have the voltage there, we have a bad board. If we do have the voltage there at the board, we need to go to the door lock itself. Again, we'd be going to that red wire with the pink with the black tracer, which would be your neutral, and we check it there. So if we have it there, then we're going to take a look at the other side of it, because once that door locks, that red voltage supplies the voltage to that lock. We're going to go to the white wire with the red tracer and to pink with the black tracer. Now that once that door locks, it closes that switch, the door lock switch, which is called the door lock sense, which sends it back to the lower board, checking to see, once that lower board gets that voltage on a door lock sense, then it says, okay, the door is locked. Let's go ahead and start this cycle. So we check it there. If we have the voltage on red going to the door lock, and nothing coming out of it, and that door lock is clicking, either we have a mechanical bind where that catch on a door isn't in the door lock far enough where it can't close the switch, or we have a bad door lock. And a lot of times to check that door lock at that point in time, I usually take the 2 screws out of the door lock, push the door lock into the machine, remove that lower access panel, and bring that door lock all the way out through the bottom, that access panel, and bring it back up and put it right on the catch of the door, and then try starting a spin cycle. If the door locks at that point in time, then we know it's not a bad door lock. The door lock is good, because it just locked on the door. Then we have a mechanical bind. A lot of times I see, I had one that came back to us where it was doing this exact thing. And if I looked at it just perfectly, I could see where the door lock was mounted into that front panel. That front panel had an ever so slight concave in, and a lot of times I'll see, where the installers will take their dolly and put it on the front of the machine and crank those straps tight, and then tip the machine forward to set it in place. And it's bowing in that front panel, which now the top of the door hits and the catch on the door can't get in far enough to do it. So that would be a mechanical bind. You're looking at a front panel on that one then, and if we have the voltage at the board red to pink black and we don't have it at the door lock, we got a bad harness. If we have it at the door lock and we have it coming out of the door lock on a white wire red tracer and we don't have it back on the board at the H5 connector, again, it's a bad harness. So, and if we don't, again, have it at the board coming on the red wire and the pink wire with the black tracer, across those two, then you have a bad board, replace that board. Sort of a lot to check on that door lock. We have the voltage going to the door lock on the red wire. Once that locks, then it closes a switch within that door lock, and then it sends a voltage on a white wire red tracer back down to the board at the H5 connector, which is the door lock sense. Until that board gets that voltage back there, the 120 volts back there, it will not start. It'll keep clicking, trying to get that voltage until it gets that voltage, and then it'll eventually throw this error code. Then I'm going to move on to the ER-DR, which is a drain error. First thing I would do on that one, I always, check that foreign object filter on the drain pump. You can take a turn it, once you remove that, all the water is going to come running out of the machine if there's any in it. You can use a shop vac to suck it out, or make sure you have enough towels there to catch the water. When you remove that, check that for debris. And then if that is clean and still not draining, we're going to check the AC voltage white wire with black tracer to the white wire at H6 on that output board, and make sure that we're getting the proper voltage to that drain pump. If voltage is there at that output board, then we're going to go to the drain pump itself. And we're going to check the voltage on the wires. You can take the wires right off of it. If you can't get your leads in the back of those connectors, you can take the wires right off the drain pump and put one lead in each one. If you do have voltage there and the drain pump is not running, replace the drain pump. If you had the voltage at the board and no voltage at the drain pump, replace that harness. And we're going to move on to the ERFL fill error. The machine needs to get to a certain level by a certain time. So we're going to check, the hot water flow into the machine and the cold water flow into the machine. I usually, if we have one that's bad, I'll have the tech shut that water off, take the hose off of the machine and check the screen. If we have debris in the screen, remove the screen and clean that screen. If there's no debris in the screen, put the hose down the standpipe or in a slop sink or whatever's around, and just turn the faucet on to make sure we got good water flow to the machine. And if the water flow is not good to the machine, the customer is going to have to take care of the water pressure within the house. If we have good water pressure to the machine and the screens are not plugged and we still have slow water fill, we're going to take a voltage reading at your hot and cold water valves, make sure we're getting 120 volts to those hot and cold water valve. And if the voltage is good there, then replace that water valve. Again, we're going to do the board ID. It's same as the dryers. The wrong board was put in the machine. Always whenever you get a board ID, it's always some board. One of the boards in that machine isn't compatible to read the other board. Then we're going to move on to an ED10. Whenever we get an ED error code, instead of the ER, the ED is a drive error that's telling us that the lower board, output board, is sensing something is not right. And that's when that error code comes up. So the ED10 is a voltage select error. Check your AC voltage black to white at your H1 connector. On that lower output board, you should read at least read the 120 volts. We can do a 10%, so it's 12 volts up or down. If it's within that 10%, that's good. Always keep it on. Those two wires for probably 10 to 15 seconds for sure, because we're going to look for fluctuating voltage. This error code is going to be either too high a voltage, too low a voltage, a bad neutral, or fluctuating voltage. So that's what we do. And then when we're done with the black to white, if that check's good, we're going to go black to green to make sure we have the proper polarity. Again, keep it on for a little while, make sure we have no no fluctuating voltage. If the black to white is good voltage, we would assume that the green to black is going to be good steady voltage also. And if the AC voltages are correct, replace that output board. If the voltage are incorrect, I had a machine the other day, just today, where I had 151 volts coming to that H1 connector on that board. That's way out of parameter. Something's going to have to be done to get that voltage down in the house. And an ED21, again with ED, it's sensing something the drive board is sensing that is wrong. Here we have an over voltage DC bus error. Again, same checks. We're going to go to that black to white at the H1. And again, 120 volts, make sure we're within the 10% up and down. No fluctuating voltage, proper polarity, the black to green, everything, to make sure that's all good, to make sure we have good steady voltage, and on this one, it could be because the DC bus error could be a hot motor or a motor winding that could be causing that also. So we're going to have you remove the H7 connector from that output board, and then we're going to ohm out your motor windings. So we're going to ohm black to white, black to brown, and then brown to white. And the motor windings should be uniform. And on these front load washers, they should be between 3.4 and 3.7. If one of them is out of that 3.4 to 3.7, if it's too high, too low, then we would go right to the motor, disconnect that connector from the motor and ohm it at the motor. And if we ohm it at the motor, and the motor shows that same winding is out, we need to replace the motor. If the motor is checking good and we had one winding out, through the harness, we're going to need to replace that harness. And if the voltages are good at H1 and your motor windings all read correctly, or uniform in between that 3.4 and 3.7, then we're going to replace that output board. Is going to be bad. And then the ED29, again, is very similar. It's the second half of the ED21. It's a motor not connected error code. Again, we're going to go to the H7 connector on that output board, and we're going to check, the black to white, black to brown, brown to white. Again, 3.4 to 3.7. And same thing with the last error code. If it's the motor has the bad winding, replace the motor. If it's a harness that's causing that, replace the harness. And if everything reads correctly through the harness, that the motor windings are good, replace that output board. Okay, that pretty much covers the highest error codes that we see at TechLine here. So if anybody else has any questions at this point in time.
I don't see anything coming up yet in the chat.
Okay, I know I'm going through this pretty quick and there's a lot of different checks to do, but it's just like, I just wanted to get this out, in this. So I'm going to move on to the TC5 washer. Now there's a top load washer that has the transmission. And okay, we're going to have the wash and rinse 2 times. Again, that's going to be your fill error. Check your hot and cold. I usually have the technician go to the heavy duty cycle, put it on hot water, let it fill, ask them, by listening to it, do you have good hot water flow? And if you have good hot water flow, then I have them switch to the cold water. You're going to get a brief pause and it'll start filling with cold. And if you have either one of the two is slower than the other, again, we would go and shut the cold water, the hot water off, take the hoses off of the machine, check the screens to see if there's any debris, run the hose right into the machine, put it right in the wash tub, turn your shut off valve back on, to make sure we have good flow within the house. If we don't have good flow within the house, the customer is going to have something fixed within their house. If we do have good flow to the machine, again, screens are clean and we still have slow water flow. Again, we would go to and check our voltage at your water valves. Again, your hot and cold water valves, you should have 120 volts at those hot and cold water valves. And we're going to go to soak spin. Here we're back on the communication error code. Again, it's exactly the same in this machine as it is on all the other machines that have the two boards. Yeah, they cannot communicate. And again, it's very, very, important that we check that DC voltage. Again, it's the output board that puts out the DC voltage. Again, red to white is going to be, needs to be at least 12 volts. And your gray to white, which is your power fail circuit in there, needs to be between a 5.5 and 7.5. Again, we would check that if we have that at the lower board, we move up to the upper board in the console, and we do the same thing, same check, same 8-pin connector, same wires, red to white, gray to white. Again, the 12 volts, the 5.5 to 7.5. And if we have it there, then we need to go and ohm out the yellow and orange wires. Again, if that yellow and orange wires ohm out good, then we would be, checking, pull off the connectors off of both boards, checking for corrosion on connectors, pins on the board loose or have corrosion on them, anything that would stop DC voltage. And, check that, make sure all the wires are pushed into the connectors properly, to make sure that we are getting a good contact from harness to board and everything. And again, if everything checks out good at that point in time, we're going to have to replace both boards and the harness. And if one place, like if we did have the voltage at the lower board, not at the upper board, you got a bad harness. Usually on these, when you were done diagnosing, we have no further diagnosis on that than what I just went through. Again, the majority of the time, I usually a lot of times have the servicers report back to us. A lot of the times, I'm going to say 70-75% of the time, it's the lower board that takes care of it. So if you want to order, the 3 parts, and then you put that lower board in, it takes care of it. You don't need to put the other 2 in. You can send them back, and get refunded for the parts. All right, I'm going to move on to the wash and rinse lights flashing one time between pauses. And that's going to be a pressure sensor error. So the upper board at that point in time cannot read the pressure sensor. So we're going to check our DC voltage red to white at that pressure sensor. So the upper board is going to be sending 5 volts DC to that pressure sensor. And then if your meters can ohm in hertz, measure frequency, we can do the gray to white at that upper board front end control. And it should be between 450 and 600, that frequency. And then that is sending the proper frequency back to the upper board. So the upper board would know, either it's full, it's not full, so if you're getting that frequency back at the upper board, gray to white, it's the upper board not reading the pressure sensor correctly. If you're not getting the 5 volts DC red to white at the pressure sensor, again, it's either your upper board, you can check at your red to white at that front end control. If you got it there and not at the pressure sensor, you have a bad harness. If the upper board is not giving the pressure sensor the 5 volts DC, then you have a bad upper board. And too, if you're able to ohm in the hertz, I know a lot of techs out there do not have that feature, but if you're able to do that and you have those hertz, that hertz reading, that frequency reading at the pressure sensor and not at the upper board, then you have a bad harness again. So that's how to diagnose that. There's 3 parts that take place in that error code: your pressure sensor harness, and your upper board. So by doing the DC voltage checks going to the pressure sensor, from the upper board, and then the frequency coming from the pressure sensor back to the upper board. So I'll move down to number 4 here. We have wash and rinse lights flashing 4 times between pauses. That's going to be a slow drain error code. Check drain pump for foreign objects, on the TC5, the drain pump is attached right to the bottom of the shaft. So there's no electricity or anything going to it, so if we get that error code, the pump is either working or there's something in it, or if the customer uses too much detergent and we're starting to get suds in that pressure sensor bulb, and that dries in there and it's not able to release the pressure as the drain pump pumps the water out of the machine, and it's not able to see that pressure drop because if something's in that pressure bulb, it will throw that same error code because it's not, or it's releasing the pressure slowly, but it's not sensing, it's pumping it fast enough and throwing that error code. So again, a couple things I always have the servicers ask the customer, how much detergent are you using? If they're using, oh, we're using a half a cup. Yeah, way too much. With all the detergents out there right now, I know I saw Persil advertising last night. I think, yeah, last night I saw it on a TV commercial, 10 times concentrate. So back in the day when we first came out, when I first got into this, we just basically had basic detergents. You didn't have the 10 times concentrate, the 8 times concentrate, stuff like that. So yeah, so we usually suggest 2 tablespoons of detergent for a large load of soiled laundry. And then 1 tablespoon of detergent for a large load, of clothes like I wear here and, at the office and working where there's really nothing for dirt in them, so we're gonna, just the 1 tablespoon then. And like I said, if they use too much detergent, that suds that's sitting on top of the water can also get pushed up in that pressure bulb and create no fill, slow fill, our slow drain error codes because the pressure sensor is not either getting the pressure put on it or releasing the pressure the way it should. You can also look for a kinked pressure sensor bulb. Again, it's not going to allow the pressure to get to the pressure sensor or remove from the pressure sensor, in this case on the drain error. So we're going to move down to number 5, soak, wash, spin 4 times. Again, board ID error. I think everybody pretty much knows what that is. Wrong board was put into the machine. Just check your part numbers on your boards. If you just replaced one, verify that it is the correct part. The only way that's going to come up is if incompatible board was put in the machine. And we got the soak, wash, spin lights flashing 3 times between pauses. Again, board shorted error code. At this point in time, we would check that lid switch. The switch, the right hinge on this lid will activate that lid switch. And the front of that lid should be open 2 inches. When that lid switch clicks on these TC5s, we do not want it to be more than that 2 inches because the lid is what, if you open it up, it's at 4 or 5 inches and you open up that lid, a hand can go in there and it could stay and spin. So for sure 2 inches, exactly, no more on this machine, and at that point in time, the output board has to be replaced because the board shorted error is there's a short in that board. I just want to make sure the lid switch, because if that lid switch is just as you move the lid and it clicks right away, that lid switch could be chattering when it goes into spinning. You have that vibration on the machine, that lid switch could be chattering and shorten out that board. So that's why we always want to make sure that that lid opens up 2 inches in the front. And it's very particular on this TC5 because it doesn't have a lid lock, that it doesn't go more than 2 inches. So we can't get customers, or nobody can get their hands in there when it's in spin and cause damage to themselves. Here, if the washer agitates and does not fill with water, usually the washer is in a water monitoring mode. And how it gets into water monitoring mode, again, the pressure sensor sensed a drop in pressure while the machine was either running or if it's sitting idle. So like if you have a bad drain pump and you replace that drain pump, all that water that runs out of there, that sensor senses that you lost that pressure on that pressure sensor, and it's reporting to that upper board, hey, I'm leaking. That water went out and I was not in a position to be removing that water, so it puts itself into a water monitoring mode, so it will not ever fill with water until a complete spin cycle is run. Just go to spin, hit start, wait till it finishes on its own, go back to heavy duty, push start, you're going to get water. Again, water monitoring, any drop in pressure, if you unplug the pressure sensor tube, take it off while there's water in the tub, you automatically just release that pressure on that pressure sensor. So again, it's going to put it into the water monitoring mode. If the customer starts a cycle and it's filled, it's starting to agitate, it's just like, oh, I don't want that pair of jeans in there. They open up the lid, take that pair of jeans out, you're going to drop that water level enough that it's going to put it in water monitoring mode. Again, run a complete spin cycle and it will take it out of that water monitoring mode. Any questions on a TC5 washer?
So far, nothing. Tim, we look like we got about 8 more minutes before we're gonna close.
Okay, yeah, and a lot of these, because we're going to do the TR washers now, I'm going to cover, a lot of these are going to be very similar. Again, you're going to have your fill error, you're going to have your the board shorted error, but I'll quick run through them here. Here on this ERLL, uppercase L, lowercase L, it's a non-fatal lid locking error. The first thing I always have the tech do is make sure the lid lock is plugged in. Because a lot of times we find on these, if there's such a little tab on them, you plug them in, sometimes they go into spin in that vibration, sometimes they back out, make sure it's seated all the way in. Again, we would check, again, we have through the H5 connector on that lower board, you're going to have 120 volts going to your lid lock on the red wire, very similar to the door lock on the front load washers. So if the board at the H5 connector, you have the voltage red to a neutral. So I always go to the white wire at the H1 on that board, which is your neutral. These lid locks and door locks do not have a ground wire going to them. So we always got to check to neutral on that, and if you have no voltage, coming out of that board on that red wire, you have a bad board. If you do have the voltage coming out on that red wire to the lid lock, again, I would check up at that lid lock. If you don't have the voltage there and you have it at the board, a bad harness. Again, once that locks, you're going to send the voltage on a white wire red tracer back to the H5 connector, which is the lid lock sense, and it needs to get back there. So if you have it at the lid lock on the white wire red tracer and not at the lower board, again, you're going to have a bad harness. And if you are getting it back at the lid lock sense at the H5 on that white wire red tracer, then you're going to have a bad board. If you have the 120 volts there and it's still sitting there clicking back and forth, that means the lid lock is closing and it's sending the switch on a lid lock sense. The board is receiving that voltage, but it's not accepting the voltage. We need to replace the board, that lower board, so I just did a quick run through on that one. Oops. Again, your fill error, again, hot and cold water, we've covered that, in the front load washer, we covered it in a TC5, the ERBS error code, again, that is board shorted error code. Again, check the adjustment of the lid switch. The front of the lid should be open 2 inches when it clicks, and replace that lower output board. Either way, with the board shorted, the board is shorted. We just want to make sure that the lid switch is in adjustment, not that you replace the board and the lid switch clicks as soon as you move the lid, the next board will be taken out by it also. Again, the communication error code, I think I covered it in every machine so far. So I think we've got that pretty well covered. And if you don't, if you have any questions on this, you can always email us at the end of the session and we'll answer any questions at that point in time also. And on our TRs, we're going to have out of balance ERUB on the TR7 out of balance error code. Again, if that, I always have the tech put it to a spin cycle. And if the motor doesn't turn in spin, I always go down to the lower board at that H4 connector. You're going to have a black and a violet wire there. Remove that pin, the connector from the board. And then we're going to ohm across the 2 pins on the board. And you should read between 300 and 400 ohms on that board. If that's not there, that's open. More than likely the out of balance switch got wet and is hitting and it took out the out of balance circuit on the board. So at that point in time, both parts need to be replaced, the board and the out of balance switch. The most important part about that is fix the leak. Why'd that out of balance switch get wet? So we need to get that fixed and everything, so if it's runs in spin, but then we get the error code, that means it's hitting the out of balance switch. Make sure the customer uses auto water fill. These machines are designed to wash better when it has the proper amount of water in it for the amount of clothes in it. They select large. With the wash process, it turns the wash tub 2 complete turns, stops, goes back about 2 complete turns. So the water motion through the clothes, if you have too much water for the amount of clothes in the machine, the clothes are going to float with the water. And then when it does its last 2-turn rotation, the heaviest article of clothing is going to fall. Everything's going to start piling up on it, and you're going to get an out of balance situation. Again, the broken belt error code. Again, if the belt is broke, replace the belt. If it is not broke, then the upper board, the front end control needs to be replaced. That's what reads that motor. It thinks the motor is free spinning. Again, ID error code, wrong board. The ED21, again, the over voltage bus error, your H1, make sure you have proper, voltage there, and check out your motor windings. And then again, ED29, which we covered, on the front load washers too, again, make sure the motor windings out good, and then if not, if they do replace the board, if they don't replace either the harness or the motor where the issue is. And then a TR3 and a TR5, again, same error codes. It's just you don't have a display. You're going to have lights flashing, between pauses. Again, your fill error, your unbalanced error, everything we covered just in the TR7. Lid lock error, same thing, diagnosing that lid lock. Your wash spin lid lock 3 times is your board shorted error. Again, lid switch adjustment and replace the output board. The pressure sensor, wash rinse flashing 1 time. Again, pressure sensor, upper board is not reading the pressure sensor. So again, broken belt ID, everything is in here that usually is. Again, if I didn't cover an error code that comes up, that you see here, then, refer to your troubleshooting manual and parts connection at pc.alliancels.net. If you need further assistance, you can call our tech line at 920-748-3121. Sorry, I had to rush through that end part, but tried to get finished. Again, any questions? Technical service at alliancels.com. And then put in their attention, Tim, and I can get any questions that are out there on any. Otherwise, just give our tech line a call. We got some really good techs here. We got just about 90 years worth of experience on our tech team, so, feel free to call this tech line. It's 5 o'clock.